So in 2018, the Israeli Knesset demoted Arabic from official language to an undefined, nebulous special status as part of its nation-state law. שומעים אותי? Voila. In 2018, the Israeli Knesset demoted Arabic from official language to an undefined, nebulous special status as part of its nation-state law. As the direct effects and affects of the law are still unknown, many concerns about actual linguistic practices have been raised. Some include, in what language will queer Arab youth feel most confident in expressing themselves and their stories? Does this also affect the Hebrew-speaking queer youth equally? Will and do queer Israeli youth more generally use another different linguistic code to describe themselves more accurately? This presentation seeks to provide preliminary answers to these questions by illuminating how some queer Israeli youth use English as a potential discursive resource for national, gender, and sexual identity practice in place of Hebrew or Arabic, as English does not implement gendered morphosyntax. To situate my presentation, it's important to locate and connect the seemingly disparate fields of youth cultures, queer linguistics, education, and multiple literacies. To begin, Blackburn built on G's definition of discourse and Anzaldua's theory of borderlands. She argues that a borderland discourse is a metacognitive understanding of discourses that allows youth to make more powerful choices in language use so that they can assert themselves as agents deciding what kind of work they want to accomplish, including, but not limited to, the elicitation of pleasure, subversion of oppression, and the retaliation against hate. In such a way, her participants' borderland discourse becomes a means of taking back power from their racist and homophobic oppressors, simultaneously fighting against them. Moreover, Buchholz and Scapulli argued that identities, especially sexual identities, emphasize, quote, the local as a geographic place and a cultural space, embedded within a global semiotic, thus moving through a mosaic discourse space, participating in its reproduction and transformation. Thus, English language learners, especially queer English language learners, discursively construct their identities through mediation and negotiation because the local and the global exist synergistically. Although Bristow et al. Did not explicitly research the intersections of queer youth identities in language, they argued that, quote, multilingualism is a collection of specific resources which include concrete accents, language varieties, registers, genres, and modalities grounded in people's biographies. This point is important because youth reproduce and produce their identities based on everyday approaches to sexuality, citizenship, family, gender, race, sociopolitics, and geography. I now move to my own data on queer youth mediating and negotiating their hybrid identities via English. The purpose of sharing this data is threefold. It documents linguistic performances of socio-geopolitical identity as simultaneously Western and non-Western. It performs it looks at the cross-linguistic influence of additional language on the development and re-indexing, reimagining of mother tongues and sexual identities. And it addresses a dearth of non-normative sexualities in second language development research. The following data come from a larger case study where Israeli queer youth map their life histories socioculturally, nationally, and ethno-linguistically. Finally, via their multilingual and hybrid identities. I collected the data between 2020 and 2022 using a case study approach, and thereafter thematic coding, critical discourse, and narrative analysis. Participants signed up in the project's website after initial contact via social media, IGI's newsletter, or recommendations from parents, teachers, or friends who assumed their interest in the study. Thereafter, I conducted between 4 and 5 hour-long semi-structured ethnographic interviews in which each participant sat via Zoom outside of school hours due to corona restrictions put in place by the Ministry of Education. Today I wanted to share two of the youth voices, the first being Dayan, who identifies as non-binary and 21 from Ashdod. They use the pronouns they, them, theirs, and is ex-dati. They were born to German immigrant parents living between Tel Aviv and London. They are a native bilingual of Hebrew and English. However, their parents did not choose to teach any of their children Georgian, their mother tongue, as they didn't see the cultural capital thereof. Through English, Dayan felt alien and stuck, whereas English provided them an escape. The second being Raphael, who is 19, from Jaffa, who identifies as a cisgendered male, using he, him, his, and has his Arab roots in Cyprus. He is also a native bilingual, though of Arabic and Hebrew, where Arabic he felt denied, avoided, and as if his peers were troublemakers. Hebrew he hardly connected and regretted. However, within English, he feels that it's favorable because he can express himself more accurately. The ways in which Dayan and Raphael spoke about and around Arabic, English, and Hebrew proved crucial to understanding not just how they queered and used language, but also how they performed and synergized their identities. This means that linguistic performances of self cannot be separated from cultural mores or ideologies of and about citizenship or gender and sexuality. Language, therefore, is neither apolitical or unfixed within a society or culture. It serves a purpose and wields power. Accordingly, for Dayan, in place of Hebrew, English became dominant and exclusive, bringing their world into focus in a much clearer way. They reflected, "The use of English to me is not only dominant, it's also something that is exclusive. From a young age, I used only English because what I was interested in wasn't available in Hebrew. So, I see the world in a much clearer way in English. It was only in the past couple of years that I started to see the beauty of Hebrew. So the majority of my life, I used only English in ways to expose myself to the universe. It was my only way to communicate in a way, as I haven't found myself within the Hebrew language. You said exclusive can mean special? I guess you can. English is really special to me." In this interview, Dayan began outlining their ideologies of English as a dominant force in their life. For them, English was also exclusive. They further explained that, in its exclusivity, English allowed for an exploration of that which was unavailable to them in Hebrew. Structurally, Dayan separated their ideologies surrounding both English and Hebrew in their word choice. On the one hand, when speaking about and around English, they used militant and hegemonically masculine adjectives like dominant, exclusive, and clearer. They only modified their description of English and its use with the adverb-adverbial phrase only 3 times, expressing a comparison. Furthermore, Dayan enacted English through a sense of sight, with mainly visual infinitives such as to see, to expose, and to find, with an added ability afforded by to communicate. Therefore, English discursively allowed Dayan not just to see the world, but also themselves and themselves within it. Hebrew, on the other hand, remained intangible when they referred to the beauty of Hebrew. In this excerpt, Hebrew remains as aesthetic and not a physical entity. It is unused and solely looked upon. It is neither enacted nor embodied, maybe even going as far to have problematized Hebrew as effeminate despite its Zionist and masculist underpinnings. In such a way, both Hebrew and English were thingified or commodified via Dayan's redefinition of exclusive. For Dayan, English was special and personal. It was attainable and accessible. Hebrew was not. It remained unattainable and inaccessible. Although they now admittedly find Hebrew beautiful, this was not always the case and may be attributed to Dayan's experiences of trauma and violence in school. Like Dayan, Raphael detailed his ideas surrounding language as context-dependent and therefore felt empowered or powerless depending upon the linguistic code. Interestingly, Raphael also invoked ideologies of holiness and national identity when talking about Hebrew, just like Dayan in subsequent interviews. This changed, though, when Raphael explained his ideologies around Arabic as previously discussed. He instead felt othered and unconnected. However, Raphael agreed that English is both usable and equitable. In the excerpt below, Raphael explained how English is, quote, the gay comfort zone. He expounded, "I hardly connect with the gay community in Israel. I guess I subconsciously connected to the two, English and queerness." He paused slightly. "It's the gay comfort zone. It's like gay culture can happen anywhere. You don't need to go to some place. You don't need to go to a holy land. Like, okay, cool. You're queer, great. Put up a flag. Great, but what now? He chuckled. English is not located anywhere, it's all around. Raphael separated between imagined communities. Israeli gays versus gays using English more generally without geolocation. Because he didn't feel at ease within the Israeli gay community, Raphael labeled English as the gay comfort zone. He therefore bonded queerness to English as a linguistic code, noting that English is neither geographically nor culturally bound. This is not unlike Nelson's studies, where queer language learners used English as a gay lingua franca. In such a way, Raphael ironically analogized the lexical tokens Holy Land and flag for three different discursive purposes. Firstly, by saying you don't need a Holy Land to go to, Raphael added to Dayan's ideologies in that Hebrew is bound to both ethno-linguistic traditions as well as a geopolitical location. Raphael therefore directly indexed Israel when stating Holy Land without having to state where the language was bound. This also makes being an Arab citizen of Israel near linguistically impossible per the execution, jurisdiction, and legislation of the 2018 nation-state law. Secondly, in his disjunction from Hebrew, Raphael entered the larger imagined community of Anglophonic gays more globally. This imagined community then has English as the unifying factor across cultures and transnationally. He no longer needed to code switch or negotiate identities based purely on group context. He could fully hybridize his identities because the group has a neutral linguistic code. Finally, in using English as the great equalizer, Raphael orientalizes both Hebrew and Arabic by indexing them as lacking or intolerant of hybrid identities. Therein, English separates and whitewashes Raphael's linguistic and sexual citizenship, erasing him of his ethno-linguistic histories and ideologies. This goes further when analyzing Raphael's inculcation of a flag. As such, a flag is a physical and ideological representation of subjectivity, agency, sovereignty, and governance in the same way that did Neil Armstrong's walking on the moon. To raise a flag is to establish one's voice and power, demanding respect and exaltation from its peers. Moreover, within the gay comfort zone, Raphael went on to explain that English eased and calmed him linguistically. In English, he does not need to overthink, he just is. He continued that it's a lot easier for me in English because I can say whatever I want, and I won't regret it afterwards. In Hebrew, most of the times, I just rethink my sentence 1,000 times, and even when I say that, well, I should have said something more, or said it like that, or maybe explained it a little more. It's like in English, I could just straight up say what I want to say without going into too many loops. In English, Raphael dropped his affective filters surrounding language and speaking with others. Raphael was extremely socially conscious throughout our meetings, constantly feeling trapped within having to say the right thing and explaining himself fully the first time. He didn't feel that he could do this in Hebrew, let alone Arabic, though he felt absolved of this through using English. Structurally, Raphael clearly delineated English from both Hebrew and Arabic. English for him was a lot easier, understandable, and comfortable. Through English, he was clear and succinct. English was also actionable through the verb to say, and therefore he could express himself. Conversely, in Hebrew, Raphael felt trapped into too many loops or had to rethink his sentence 1,000 times. The Raphael who spoke Hebrew was pensive, cognitive, and cerebral through verbs like to rethink and explain. These differ from to say because for Raphael, what was said upon first utterance was comprehended at face value without need for further explanation or description. In addition, Raphael's ideologies around Hebrew were discursively negated when he snickered his lips. This is interesting because, depending upon linguistic code and culture, snickering your lips has a nuanced meaning. For Arabic and Hebrew speakers, snickering lips culturally, discursively indicates negation, as in Raphael snickers his lips to signal that he was changing and or negating his previous statement. However, for Anglophones, snickering lips indexes disapproval, distaste, disagreement, or disrespect. The nuanced, discursive and metalinguistic practice innately imbued how Raphael viewed himself within Hebrew, but also about Hebrew as a linguistic code. In this presentation, Both Raphael and Diane alike used English as a borderland discourse, for it worked to create such a border as to distinguish safe from unsafe, and us from them, so that communication among some was facilitated, while that amongst others, particularly potential oppressors, was hindered. Thus, English firstly allowed Raphael and Diane to exit the restrictions imposed upon them via Hebrew and Arabic, and they were thus free to practice multiple identities concurrently. Secondly, their English use escaped ethnography and demographics as it exited their mother tongue, ideologies, and paradigms. This, in turn, allowed for entrance into a global queer imagined community outside of the Israeli queer community. Finally, English helped them to escape national borders and ideas of citizenship, as they were not discursively confined to Israel socio-geopolitically. Therefore, their English use was ideologically an act of linguistic and sexual citizenship that problematized and maybe even contradicted ethno-linguistic policies such as the aforementioned nation-state law or other culturally contingent identity practices. By Raphael and Diane using English, they enacted a bottom-up and queered approach to language, forcing, quote, real, legal Israeli citizens to see, feel, and hear policies enacted and embodied by the people they affect. This was demonstrated in their queer use and practice of English to subvert several different hegemonies all at the same time. Thank you.